Okay, and you guys are good to go. All loss will be around 12:51. Good luck, everyone. Have a good trial. Sorry about the issues.
Well, good morning. I apologize for that. My name is Zachary Harris. I'll be the presiding judge today. If I could have everyone go around this morning, is the plaintiff ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready to proceed. May we introduce ourselves?
Yeah, please do.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Julia Farron, and I'm joined today by my co-counsel, Megna Melcote.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Alec
Morning.
Gray.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Morning.
And today we collectively represent the estate of Genesis Petrillo. There's just a few housekeeping matters that the plaintiff would like to attend to.
All right, let's get to those in a minute. Let me hear from the defense. Defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Rachel
Morning.
Polk, and I'm joined here today by my co-counsels, Mr. Matthew York
Good morning, Your Honor.
and Ms.
Morning.
Lauren Peters.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Together, we are advocating on behalf of the defendant, Ms. Harper Martini.
Good morning, Your Honor.
All right, and is the defense going to have any housekeeping to take care of?
Yes, Your Honor. Seeing
Okay.
as this is our
Let's,
first time,
Let's go back to the plaintiff since she asked first, and then if they don't clear it up, we'll come back to the defendant.
okay, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. We would just like to let Your Honor know that our attorneys and witnesses will be removing their masks once our teammates leave the room for today's trial. The plaintiff would
Okay.
also like to invoke Rules 603 and Rules 615, the constructive swearing in and the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
All right.
We would also like to ask Your Honor if all objections or evidentiary issues could be heard constructively outside the presence of the jury trial.
Yes.
And Your Honor, we have some exhibits and visual aids to share during today's trial. Would it be okay to screen share them in our virtual setting?
Yes. Has opposing counsel seen those either constructively or actually?
Yes, Your Honor, during captain's meeting.
Okay, great.
And lastly, Your Honor, due to today's virtual setting, if our attorneys could have a moment to switch out and change our names so that it's reflected correctly on Zoom, would that be okay?
Yeah, of course.
And with that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Okay. To the defense, do you have any objections to any of the witnesses being sequestered?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Any other issues with their housekeeping?
Yes, Your Honor. Seeing as it is
Okay.
our first in your court, I'd like to inquire, what are your preferences regarding sitting or standing during statements?
It's whatever you're comfortable with. It's fine.
Yes, Your Honor. And at this time, I'd like to draw your attention to case law Burdett v. Copenhagen,
Okay. And this is something you're showing me. All right.
stating that the elements of civil battery are 1, an act by a defendant, 2, an intent to cause harmful or offensive contact on the part of the defendant, and 3, harmful or offensive contact to the plaintiff.
Okay.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right. Let's proceed then to opening statements. Ms. Farron, the jury's with you.
Just one moment, Your Honor. Is everyone ready to proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Harper Martini needed control. On June 9th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto were about to celebrate the greatest day of their life. It was the night of their wedding. They were surrounded with their friends, their family, there was drinks and dancing. But by the end of the night, Genesis Petrillo would be rushed to the hospital. She would fall into a coma and she would die. To look at how such a terrible tragedy occurred, we have to take a step back and look very closely at that night. You see, members of the jury, not everyone was happy on that night of June 9th. The person that wasn't happy the night of the wedding was Harper Martini. She was the soon-to-be in-law of Genesis Petrillo and the mother of Casey Soto. Harper Martini viewed the marriage between Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto as a threat to her daughter, a threat to her business, a loss of control. You see, members of the jury, today we will show you that Harper Martini deeply disliked Genesis Petrillo. And due to this loss of control, the night of the wedding, she went in to the wine bottling area where she had access. She took a canister of toxic pesticides and placed it inside a bottle of Cara wine. She then presented that bottle of wine to Genesis as a gift. Genesis drank the wine and was poisoned to death by the pesticide. That is why we are here today, members of the jury, to bring justice to Genesis Petrillo. We will show you that it is more likely than not that Harper Martini intentionally poisoned Genesis Petrillo, and those actions led to her death. Break this down, we're first going to start with pain. Angel Rodriguez, the best friend of Genesis Petrillo, will take the stand. She will explain to you exactly how painful their relationship was, how Harper Martini viewed Genesis Petrillo as a threat to her business and a threat to her ability to control her situation and her relationship with her daughter. And then we will turn to Harper Martini's plan. You will hear from Lonnie Paris, an investigative journalist who investigated Peony Estates. He will testify about an argument he saw between Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini. He will outline to you exactly how he found a letter where Harper Martini tried to get $300,000 to Genesis Petrillo so long as she would leave the wedding area. But when that offer was refused, Harper Martini decided to seize control, and she turned to the bottle of wine. That's why we're going to have one of the foremost experts in toxicology, Dr. Kwan, take the stand and explain to you exactly how the toxic pesticides brought about Genesis Petrillo's death. Pain, a plan, and poison. Members of the jury, today's case is about control and the control that Harper Martini sought. But there is one thing that Harper Martini cannot control in today's case. That is your verdict. That is why in today's case, we will be asking you to find Harper Martini liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The defense is ready to proceed with their opening statement.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. We are here today because our client, Harper Martini, has been accused of poisoning her child's fiance, an unfounded claim to say the least. And as we navigate today's story, you will notice an unmistakable lack of evidence. Simply put, there are not enough facts to prove the act. Ms. Petrillo and Ms. Martini had a bitter relationship, but this bitterness was no different than the stereotypical relationship people have with their in-laws. Yet, the plaintiff will use this relationship to paint a picture, implying Ms. Martini is the villain of this story. But make no mistake, that is simply not true. This bitter relationship between Miss Martini and Miss Petrillo was not a one-way street. Miss Martini tried to bury the hatchet with Miss Petrillo on multiple occasions. Miss Martini is not the villain. Members of the jury, as the state describes their version of the story that night, I want you to listen closely. You will hear how Miss Martini was in fact not the one to hand the bottle of Cara wine to Miss Petrillo that night. And who knows what could have happened during that time. You will also hear about how the key piece of evidence in this case, the Cara wine bottle, was in fact contaminated with pesticides after Miss Petrillo drank it, not before. And finally, you will also hear the story of Miss Martini. Now, the state is going to try to describe Miss Martini as hateful, devious, overprotective, overbearing mother. But Miss Martini is none of these things. Members of the jury, you will hear from 3 witnesses today. First, Blair Osborne, a longtime work friend of Miss Martini. She will tell you about her experience that night, as well as her testament to Miss Martini's character. Second, you will hear from Dr. Cannon. Now, Dr. Cannon has reviewed the death of Miss Petrillo and is here today to explain other possibilities of Miss Petrillo's death to you. And finally, you will hear from Harper Martini. And by then, the plaintiff will have made you perceive Miss Martini in a negative way. But we are in a court, and a court deserves justice, and justice demands your unbiased attention. So when Miss Martini is on the stand, we ask that you give her a fair trial. Make no assumptions about her and truly listen to what Miss Martini has to say. We ask that you take a step back from the case and truly listen to the facts. Members of the jury, the plaintiff has just told you their side of the story. And you may have noticed one of their focuses was the preponderance of evidence. To understand why is the foundational reason we are here today. Members of the jury, you might be wondering to yourselves, why is a battery case being held in civil court instead of criminal? Well, the simple answer is the plaintiff knows they lack the evidence to prove Miss Martini did in fact poison Miss Petrillo. Instead, the plaintiff only has to make it appear probable, yet they will struggle to do even that, since there are simply not enough facts to prove the act. Members of the jury, for battery to be applied in today's case, the plaintiff must prove 3 factors. Number 1, there was an act committed by Miss Martini. Number 2, there was intent to cause harm to Mr. Petrillo. And number 3, there was harmful contact from Miss Martini onto Miss Petrillo. I want you to focus on the first one. Today, you will not hear any evidence of an act from Miss Martini onto Miss Petrillo. The burden of proof is simply too large for the plaintiff to bear in today's case. There are not enough facts to prove the act. This death was tragic, but make no mistake, this case which blames Miss Martini for the death of Miss Petrillo is not a means to justice. Miss Petrillo's death was an unforeseen accident, not an intentional act committed by Miss Martini. Punishing an innocent person like Miss Martini creates 2 victims, which is why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Lauren Peterson, will come before you and ask you to find Harper Martini not liable for the death of Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. York. All right. Plaintiff will call your first witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor, one moment.
Take your time.
The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
All right. Ms. Rodriguez, you've been sworn. Let's proceed to question.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a kindergarten teacher to about 30 of my closest little friends. It's such a rewarding job, and it's also exceptionally tiring. I can only deal with so many temper tantrums over not being able to eat glue because it looks yummy. See, before Zoom, I could just take a glue stick away from a child, and now I have to entice them back to the screen. It's like herding cats. I always used to tell Genesis the stories that these wacky kids would tell.
And why are you here today?
I'm here because Genesis Petrillo, my best friend, died the morning of her wedding.
How did you know Ms. Petrillo?
Man, I met her and Casey years back at what became our favorite restaurant, and it was actually there that they asked me to be their maid of honor.
And from what you saw, how would you describe Ms. Petrillo's and Ms. Soto's relationship?
They were just the couple that you assumed would be together forever. Like, nothing else would make sense. Although there were always issues with Casey's parent, Harper.
What do you mean by issues?
Well, the wedding planning was going great up until Harper got involved. And then no one could agree on anything. Yeah.
Were you
Objection,
involved?
Your Honor, the lack of personal knowledge.
Your Honor, if I may be heard.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the objection for me?
Objection, Your Honor, to lack of personal knowledge that this witness knows how the planning went with Harper Martini.
Okay. Ms. Farron?
Your Honor, the witness has laid the foundation that she was good friends with both Ms. Petrillo and Ms. Soto and knew Ms. Martini as well. And she's going to continue on in testimony laying the foundation for her involvement in planning the wedding.
May I respond?
Yeah.
Your Honor, this witness has not laid any foundation that she knows Harper Martini, only simply that she thinks that there was a problem with the wedding planning.
Okay. Ms. Farron, are you going to be able to lay the foundation that this witness will have knowledge of how the planning was going?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. I see that you do. And if the foundation isn't sufficient, Ms. Polk, feel free at the end to make a motion to strike. So at this point, it's going to be
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Rodriguez, were you involved in planning the wedding?
Oh my gosh, as the maid of honor? Of course I was.
And how was that?
It was an interesting process. I really liked both the ideas that Genesis and Harper gave. But the more time I spent with Harper planning the wedding, the more I saw how toxic and complicated their relationship actually was.
What exactly do you mean by toxic and complicated?
Harper didn't like Genesis, and it all just culminated at the rehearsal dinner.
Let's talk about that rehearsal dinner. How were Ms. Petrillo and Ms. Martini acting that night?
Gosh, they were fighting all night long. And I even heard Harper tell Genesis that she should leave the family and save the family the heartache, or else she would make her disappear.
And how did Ms. Petrillo react?
She was shaking and kept looking around and even told me that she thought Harper was going to kill her if she wasn't careful.
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may?
Yep.
This is an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033, a then existing mental state. The witness testified how Ms. Petrillo was shaken up and shaking after hearing Ms. Martini's comment to her, and therefore, upon saying that she was scared and fearful, she was describing her mental state in that moment.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm not objecting to Ms. Rodriguez saying that Ms. Petrillo was shaken up. I'm objecting to her saying that she thought she was going to be killed by Ms. Martini.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
And did you see Mr. Martini later on?
Yeah, I saw her later with a pesticide canister, and when I asked her why she had it, she said that it was for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest. Look, I immediately implemented the buddy system, and I tried to keep my sight on Genesis all night.
And how did Ms. Martini act the rest of the evening?
She acted pretty similar to that, but then after the toast, she did a complete 180 and was all of a sudden very nice to Genesis, which, I mean, was a surprise, but a welcome surprise. She gave all of us our own bottle of wine, except she gave Genesis a different bottle of wine from everyone else in the wedding party. She gave Genesis the Cara wine bottle.
And did Ms. Petrillo drink this Cara wine?
Yeah, she poured herself a glass and then even offered me a sip.
And did you notice anything different about Ms. Petrillo's behavior after drinking the wine?
Not at first, but honestly, I have no idea how she drank it. It was disgusting. It tasted like one of the potions that my kindergartners would make with flowers and dirt. Thanks to COVID, I have even more reason not to drink those. But Genesis, she had a few glasses of it.
And how about as the night went on?
Yeah, about 45 minutes after that, I noticed that something was very, very wrong. She was stumbling and looked really sick. And she'd only had a few glasses of wine, so this was not normal.
And had you ever seen Ms. Petrillo act like this before?
I've never seen her act like this before, and I've been drinking with her for years. Look, I've seen adults and kids alike stumble. I mean, adults are basically 5-year-olds with enough alcohol, but Genesis never was.
And what happened after you saw Ms. Petrillo acting strange?
She eventually passed out, and then I was trying to get her back to our room, and when we got back up there, she was violently throwing up. It was a mess, and I was just getting more and more worried, and so I called 911 at 12:42, and we were rushed to the hospital.
What happened at the hospital?
Genesis was immediately admitted, and the doctors were with her the entire night. And at 8 a.m., they came out and told me that Genesis had fallen into a coma that was likely due to poisoning.
What did you do after this?
I just knew that I had to get back to Casey, so I rushed back to Peony Estates.
And did you see Casey at Peony Estates?
I was trying to get to Casey, but I ran into Harper first.
And did you talk to Ms. Martini?
Yeah, Harper asked if Genesis had been poisoned.
Ms. Rodriguez, had you told Ms. Martini that Ms. Petrillo was in the hospital?
No, I hadn't said anything to anybody, and I was the only one that went with Genesis to the hospital to begin with.
What happened after you saw Ms. Martini?
I ran to go get Casey, and we rushed to the hospital. I'm pretty sure we broke like 3 speeding laws, but it was too late. Genesis had passed away by the time we got there.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right. Libby, you need cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
You were close with Casey and Genesis, weren't you?
Yeah, no, they were my best friends.
So close that you were in the wedding party.
Yeah, I was the maid of honor.
And while planning the wedding, you noticed that there were some disagreements between Harper, Genesis, and Casey.
Yeah, there were quite a few disagreements. Genesis and Harper were fighting basically the entire time. They couldn't decide anything from tablecloths to flower arrangements, even the cake. Harper really wanted to, I'm sorry. Harper just really wanted to control the wedding, and it just wasn't the wedding that Genesis or Casey was planning.
But the disagreements were so complicated that you couldn't tell who was mad at who, could you?
Yeah, no, it got really intense.
In fact, you even admitted you never got the full story of what happened between them.
No, but I still noticed everything that happened and the tensions were sky high.
So you don't know what the arguments were about, do you?
I know mostly what the arguments were about. Like I said, with all aspects of the wedding planning, like cake to decorations and whatnot.
Okay, Ms. Rodriguez. And you don't know who started them either, do you?
Well, I noticed that they started happening once Harper got involved in the wedding planning. And
But overall,
I
you
always
saw
knew that
Genesis Harper.
I'm so sorry, I was talking. I didn't hear what you were asking.
Overall, you saw Genesis Harper and Casey trying to make amends, didn't you, Ms. Rodriguez?
I don't really know what I mean. Harper gave Genesis the bottle of wine out of the blue, if that's what you call making amends.
Ms. Rodriguez, you didn't even know Harper well, did you?
I mean, I knew her decently. We were both helping plan the wedding.
Really?
Or more, I was helping plan the wedding and she was planning the wedding.
In fact, you only met her once or twice, didn't you?
Yeah, I met her a few times.
But you do know Harper was very involved in the planning of the wedding.
No, exactly. She was very involved with planning this wedding.
So involved that she even offered to host the wedding at her winery, Peony Estate, correct?
Yeah, I mean, she hosted the wedding because she has a winery and, it made sense to have it there. Although I think there was a disagreement about even that.
Ms. Rodriguez, can you keep it to a yes or no, please?
I'm so sorry. What did you say?
Can you keep your answers to a yes or no, please?
Oh, sure. I'll answer your questions.
You would agree Harper cared about the success of the wedding?
Yeah, she wanted things to go her way.
Now, you went to the wedding party at Black Bear Casino, correct?
I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that again?
You went to the wedding party at Black Bear Casino, correct?
Yes, I did. It was really fun.
And you found Genesis vomiting in the hotel bathroom, didn't you?
Genesis had a little too much to drink. Yes.
You attributed this to Genesis drinking too much alcohol that night, correct?
Yeah.
To lack of personal knowledge.
Okay, hold on. We've got an objection and it's a little muddled. So, Ms. Polk, if you can repeat the question, Ms. Rodriguez, don't answer it, and then I'll hear from Ms. Tarrant about the objection. What was the question, Ms. Polk?
You attributed this to Genesis drinking too much alcohol that night, correct?
Question is, Ms. Rodriguez attributed the vomiting to her. Okay, Ms. Tarrant.
Yes, Your Honor. My objection was to lack of personal knowledge. This witness can testify to how much she saw her drink, but not how she thought it affected her or give a medical diagnosis to how drunk she was.
May I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, in my previous question, Ms. Rodriguez did answer that she saw Genesis drinking several glasses of wine that night, which is why she was vomiting. She's already laid this foundation. She was with her throughout the whole night.
Is the question to Ms. Rodriguez whether, so your question was she attributed this to alcohol.
The vomiting.
Are you trying to get at, yes, are you trying to get at what Ms. Rodriguez, is it the fact that she attributed it, what you're trying to offer this for? Or you're trying to offer this to suggest to the jury that the reason she was vomiting was because of alcohol?
No, I'm
I don't know if
simply
that question is clear.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm simply trying to ask Ms. Rodriguez what she attributed to, not the exact reasoning it may have been for.
Okay, that's fair. Is there any relevance to?
Your Honor, then I would change my objection to relevance. The relevance of what Ms. Rodriguez thought that this could have been attributed to is not relevant.
Okay, I'm going to sustain the objection. Thank you both for your well argued.
Permission to strike any testimony that was elicited?
Yes, I think the court reporter would have had trouble anyway. It was pretty over top of each other, but that's all right.
Yes, Your Honor. Now I want to move on to the night of the rehearsal dinner, Ms. Rodriguez. You saw Harper holding a can of pesticide.
Yeah, I did. And when I asked her what she was doing with it, she very nervously, but I think trying to play it off as a joke, just said, "Oh, it's for Harper because Harper is such a pest." But
Ms. Rodriguez, she
Oh.
contributed to a pesticide problem, correct?
yes, I did.
Harper Martini contributed the pesticide bottle through trying to kill a cockroach, correct?
That's what she said, yeah.
Yes. And on that night, you were surprised Genesis wasn't drinking as much as usual, correct?
Yeah, Genesis wasn't drinking as much as she usually does, but got sicker than I've ever seen her before.
Yes.
After.
Now later in the evening, Harper surprised everyone by toasting Genesis, correct?
I'm so sorry. You're very, very quiet. Could you repeat your question?
Harper surprised everyone by toasting Genesis, correct?
Yeah, Genesis. She said the first toast, which was calling Genesis a problem child and making these weird comments about Genesis. And then a few minutes after all the toasts, then she gave another one where she was all of a sudden very
Okay, Ms.
nice to
Rodriguez,
Genesis. Oh,
please keep your interest. Yes or no?
Objection, Your Honor.
And you saw her give.
Yeah, hold on, counsel. Ms. Farron, I understand. Mr. Rodriguez, were you finished with your answer to that question?
no, I was not, Your Honor.
Please go ahead and finish your answer.
Thank you. Yeah, what I was saying was that when Harper changed, she all of a sudden changed to be very nice when she was giving Genesis the bottle of wine.
You saw her give Genesis this fancy bottle of wine in front of the whole wedding party, correct?
Yes, and she told Genesis to drink that bottle of wine separate from everyone else.
And you said Genesis was relieved by this gesture, happy even.
Yeah, I think she saw how happy it made Casey, but I mean, it was the first nice thing that Harper had done to Genesis and all that I've seen in all of their interactions.
And you saw Genesis drink this wine.
Yeah, she poured herself a few glasses.
You even took a sip yourself, didn't you?
And it was disgusting.
And you didn't have a lack of coordination or slurred speech.
No, I spit it out immediately.
And afterwards,
Because it
you
was-
saw Genesis drinking several more glasses of wine, correct?
Yeah, Genesis normally drinks a good amount. She can easily finish a bottle off and not even have a hangover.
Yes, drinking a lot wasn't unusual behavior for Genesis, was it?
It was not an unusual behavior.
And she had slurred speech and a lack of coordination, correct?
It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I've been drinking with Genesis for years.
She even ordered more alcohol after, tequila shots.
Yeah, she ordered tequila shots for everyone, but I don't think she drank any of them. I'm pretty sure I had a few, and our friend Drew had a few, and the other people that were with us at the bar, but I didn't see Genesis drink any of them.
Afterwards, you had a conversation with Drew, Harper's employee, correct?
Yes, I did. Drew's one of my best friends.
He told you that he and Harper wiped down all the surfaces and removed any casks or bottles of wine from the area that night, correct?
Yeah, no, he was talking about everything that they were doing in regards to their cleaning up, but I don't know.
Afterwards, you noticed Genesis was getting ill and you had to take her to the hospital, correct?
Yeah, no, like I said, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And I've been with Genesis drunk a ton of times. And we immediately went to the hospital because something was not right.
And the doctor told you that it was likely due to some type of poisoning.
Yeah, they did say that.
They didn't specify whether it was pesticide or alcohol poisoning, did they?
No, but I'm pretty sure it was in regards to the pesticide.
You're pretty sure, Ms. Rodriguez?
I believe so. I just know that they said poisoning, and the only thing that I had seen was Harper earlier with the pesticide, so I made a connection.
And Ms. Rodriguez, you've never actually witnessed any pesticide contamination at Community Estates, have you?
Well, I saw Harper with the pesticide canister.
Which she said was to kill a cockroach, correct?
Exactly what she said was to kill a cockroach. But even then, she was heading back to the bottling area.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. No further questions.
Will there be any redirect examination? I'm sorry, Ms. Barron, I can't hear. I believe you're muted still.
My apologies, Your Honor. I have no redirect. I just asked that my witness be excused.
All right, Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Barron, you want to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, just one moment.
Actually, while we're doing that, we're going to take about 30 seconds and see if I can get my audio back over, because this is working great. I'd like to hear you guys a little better than over the. Give me just a moment.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you hear me, sir?
I can hear you great.
Oh, that's way better. Okay, great. Thank you. Call your witness when you're ready. Take your time.
Just one moment, I'll get the name changed over. The plaintiff calls Lonnie Paris to the stand.
Mr. Paris, all right, you understand that you've been sworn. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury.
Hello, my name is Lonnie Paris.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Paris?
My job is to undertake the corporate greed that's running and ruining America and tackle it from the outside.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it started with webcams. When I was just a little boy, I had these pets, these stuffed animals, and I thought, these are perfect and wonderful. Little did I know, they're being stuffed from fur farms. And that's when I knew that corporate America was just not a good place to be. And I had to take it down and seek justice. And so I started my career as an investigative journalist to do just that.
And what do you do as an investigative journalist?
My job is to investigate places which are suspicious, dig in, find clues, and uncover stories.
How did you become involved in today's story?
I was investigating Peony Estates when I overheard an argument from Genesis Petrillo and Harper Martini. That very same night, Genesis ended up dead.
So I want to get into all that, but how did you end up at the wedding rehearsal dinner in the first place?
Well, I knew that if I wanted to really learn what was happening in Peony Estates, I'd have to get on the inside. So I got access to the more restricted areas like the wine bottling area.
And when you went into that wine bottling area, what were you able to find?
I looked around and was trying to figure out if anything seemed out of place when I noticed a single bottle of Cara wine sitting by itself on a shelf. I was confused as to why this single bottle was separate from everything else in this huge winery.
Did you do any more looking around this bottling area after seeing this bottle of wine?
I was about to when I heard shouting coming from the other room.
Did you go to investigate the shouting?
Absolutely. I knew I'd stumbled across something. So I went over to try and figure out who was talking, and it was Harper Martini shouting with Genesis Petrillo.
Now, were you actually able to see the argument, or were you just able to hear it?
No, I was only able to identify their voices, but I was able to clearly hear them. I made my way over to see them, but unfortunately, by the time I got there, they were gone. The only thing that was left was a single crumpled up note on the ground.
Did you end up looking at this note?
Absolutely. I figured something to do with this conversation is important to this business. And so I uncrumpled the note and read it. After realizing what I'd seen, I took a picture.
Now, what happened after you took a picture of that note?
I had to place it back because I heard someone coming over to pick it up, coming over to where I was. So I placed it back on the ground and hid.
And who came?
It was Harper Martini. She came over and picked up the note after saying, I forgot, I should dispose of this after Genesis threw this back into my face.
And after Harper Martini talked about disposing of this letter, did you see Harper do anything?
Absolutely. Immediately after this, Harper walked over to the furnace and burnt that letter.
Now, Mr. Paris, I want to go back to this note. Would you recognize a copy of that note if I were to show it to you today in court?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, permission to display, to not the members of the jury, but just to the court, Exhibit 24.
Exhibit 24?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, just the court, please. And to our.
Mr. Paris, is this the note that you were talking about?
Absolutely. This is the picture I took of that crumpled up note.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, not at all.
Do you recognize the handwriting on this note?
Yes, I can say definitively that this is Harper Martini's handwriting.
How can you say it's Harper Martini's handwriting?
I'd stumbled across several personal documents of Harper Martini earlier on in my investigation, and I took note of her handwriting. Seeing it compared with this note, I knew that they were a match.
Your Honor, at this time I offer Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Okay. Mr. York, do you have any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right. Exhibit 24 is received.
Permission to publish to the jury, Your Honor?
You may.
Now, Mr. Paris, when you read this note, did anything stand out to you about it?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that you note is the clearly ominous phrasing. It has come to this. The wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives, Genesis.
And did you see anything else other than Harper saying Genesis need to be out of their lives?
Yes, that was combined with the offer of money.
What was this offer of money?
Inside the note, there was also a wording saying that take this enclosed $300,000. Otherwise, I will take you out of the way the hard way. Don't make it come to that.
Do you know what this hard way meant?
I don't. All I can say is what I saw from that shouting match and from the note that Harper burned.
So let's go back to the wine bottling area. You saw Harper burn the note. What did you do next?
I figured that she had done something important or disposed of something important, so I followed her to the wine bottling area, where I saw her pick up that one single bottle of Cara wine and head out to the wedding rehearsal area.
Now, did you immediately follow her out to the wedding rehearsal area?
No, I wanted to finish up my investigation of the wine bottling area, so I looked around a little bit more, and that's when I spotted an empty bottle of pesticide container sitting right next to where that bottle of Cara wine was.
Now, after you saw this empty bottle of pesticides, what did you do?
After I saw this bottle of pesticides, I immediately followed Harper Martini to the wedding rehearsal area. There, she presented one bottle of Cara wine to Genesis Petrillo.
Now, Mr. Paris, this bottle of wine that Harper Martini presented to Genesis Petrillo at the rehearsal dinner, did it differ at all from the bottle of Cara wine you saw next to the empty bottle of pesticides?
Not at all.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gavin. Mr. York, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Now, you received a tip from Danny Francasio that Peony Estates was not following health guidelines, right?
Yes, I heard a tip about some wrongful pesticide usage.
And are you aware that Danny Francasio's winery is Peony Estates' rival?
I was. This is what...
As to relevance?
York?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm simply laying foundation for possible biases of this witness.
All righty. Objection is overruled. Proceed to your question.
I'm entirely aware that Peony Estate is a rival to Mr. Francasio. This is why when I received this tip, I took it with a grain of salt. And I filed it away for a couple of months in order to come back to it in case I'd found anything more.
And you also thought this story could bring you more exposure as a journalist, right?
Sure, any story will bring me more exposure. This story was nothing special, at least not until I started digging into it.
And during your investigations, you wore a disguise Is that right?
That's correct. I wanted to gain access to the restricted areas. I found in my line of work that big corporations often don't hide their darkest secrets in the waiting room. So I wore a disguise to get to the back areas.
So you trespassed into areas that you weren't allowed to as a guest, right?
I went to the restricted areas in order to uncover the truth, sir.
Well, in fact, like you said, you even broke into these restricted areas, right?
Yes, wearing my disguise, I was able to enter the more restricted areas and find what Peony Estates was hiding.
And you didn't stop there. You even broke into Miss Martini's private office, right?
This is all standard as my work in investigative journalism. In order to complete a case, you need evidence. And to find that evidence, you can't just sit around in the waiting room. You have to get in there. And so that's what I did. And in this case, it yielded spectacular results.
And you even looked through her private desk?
Yes.
But you didn't find any valuable information there, right?
I found enough for me to know that I was onto something. This is why I returned several more times to do the guided tour, in order to just case out the area, see if I see anything.
And on these guided tours, you were eventually caught by Mr. Lewis, right?
I returned many times. Often, the guide of these tours would get to know me. I didn't always wear a disguise.
Yes, but let me redirect you back to my question. I'm sorry if you answered it. You broke up for me at the start. Eventually, you were caught by Mr. Lewis, right?
Mr. Lewis is a friend of mine. He was able to recognize me after I'd been around.
Okay. But when you were caught, he prohibited you from coming onto the property anymore, right?
He told me to essentially get out of the restricted areas. Nothing I didn't expect.
But you went on to do so anyway? You kept coming back?
If I were to listen to everything that corporations tried to tell me over my years, I don't think I'd ever find anything.
And it was at one of your next little break-ins that when you overheard Miss Martini and Miss Martini and Miss Petrillo arguing, right?
That's correct. I was doing an investigation of the wine bottling area when I heard shouting from the other room.
But you weren't allowed to be on the property, right?
No.
Moving on, you said that you were at the wedding rehearsal dinner, right?
That's correct.
And this is where you apparently saw Miss Martini give the Cara wine bottle to Miss Petrillo?
Yes. After I saw Miss Martini pick up the wine bottling area, and I finished my investigation seeing the pesticide label ripped off, I figured that it was important to try and tail Miss Martini and see if she did anything. This is when I made my way to the wedding rehearsal area and saw her present Genesis with that bottle of Cara wine.
So, just to recap, everything you heard and saw that night, as well as the day you found the note, was done so while trespassing on Peony Estates property, correct?
That night? No.
You were invited to the dinner?
I'm sorry, what?
Let me redirect. Everything you saw on the night of the rehearsal dinner and the day that you found the note was all done so while trespassing on Peony Estates property, right?
That's not correct. To see what I saw with Harper Martini presenting that bottle of wine, you only needed to be in the wedding rehearsal area.
Were you an invited guest?
No, but it's a public space.
It was held on private property, though.
Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance. At this point, the witness has very clearly established that there are aspects where he went into a restricted section, but it doesn't speak to bias. Opposing counsel's questions are not going to the bias of the witness, and it isn't going to the content of his testimony. I don't see the relevance of constantly questioning this witness about whether or not he was an invited guest to the property.
Well, outside the presence of the jury, as you know, we've done constructively, it does go to the witness's credibility if he's violated some sort of law, regardless of whether or not it's effective or not. It was for Mr. York to decide. So the objection is going to be overruled, and you can proceed to question Mr. York.
Now, Mr. Perez, I'm going to ask that you please do not dodge my final question. I'm going to ask it one more time. Everything you heard and saw on Peony Estates property was done so while trespassing, right?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. York. Mr. Grevin, any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Parrs, thank you for your time. You may step down. And the plaintiff, will the plaintiff have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. Please just give us one moment to transfer everything over.
Time.
One moment, Your Honor. Just setting up some demonstratives.
Sure, take your time.
Your Honor, we call Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Okay, could you, earlier when you were introducing yourself, I had trouble hearing your last name. Could you pronounce it for me?
Of course, Your Honor. Meghna Melkote.
Melkote, okay. And it's Dr. Kwan, is that right?
Yes, Dr. Jimin Kwan.
Thank you. Dr. Kwan, you've been sworn. Please proceed with your question, Ms. Melkote.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Jin Kwan.
And what is your educational background?
I hold an MD from UNC Chapel Hill, and then I went on to Emory University to complete my medical residency, where I stayed to complete a fellowship in medical toxicology.
Doctor, you just mentioned the word toxicology. What exactly does that mean?
Well, toxicology is the study of the way that toxins affect the human body, and it's also the study of the diagnosis and treatment of those toxins.
What is your current occupation?
Currently, I'm the chief emergency doctor, ER doctor at River Valley Hospital, where I specialize in toxicology and often deal with cases of alcohol poisoning and other kinds of poisonings.
Doctor, what exactly do you do in your role as an ER doctor?
Well, my job as an ER doctor is to quickly and accurately assess symptoms as people come into the ER. And then after that initial diagnosis, I order tests to confirm that diagnosis and hopefully treat the patient. Although in some unfortunate cases, I do have to conduct cause of death determinations.
Why are you in court today, doctor?
I'm in court today because I was the ER doctor on call on June 8th, 2019, when Genesis Petrillo came into the ER.
Now, doctor, you mentioned you were on call the night she came to the ER. How do you usually go about investigating cases and making determinations about potential diagnoses and causes of death? What methods do you use?
Well, the method that I use is to first do an initial examination of symptoms and deal with any that are especially dire. And then after that, I conduct a full examination, including testing, so then I'm able to determine a diagnosis and a treatment plan.
All right, doctor, now that method that you just described, is it standard in your field?
Yes, it's the golden standard for all ER doctors. And in fact, I mandate it at River Valley Medical.
And when you were looking at this case, did you reliably apply that method?
Yes, I did.
And did you have sufficient facts and data to make an opinion on this case?
Yes.
Now, doctor, could you tell us exactly what happened the night of June 7th, 2019?
Well, on that night, Genesis Petrillo came into the ER around 1 a.m. And then after she arrived in the hospital, she was vomiting and she was nauseous, but she wasn't able to walk or speak. She was only able to indicate to me by pointing to her chest and stomach that she was having difficulty breathing and stomach pain.
Doctor, did you make an initial determination of what those symptoms could be from?
Yes, at first I determined that her symptoms might be because of alcohol poisoning, but I later figured out after a few things that that just wasn't the case.
What made you think it wasn't alcohol poisoning?
Well, Genesis Petrio's symptoms were not analogous with those of alcohol poisoning, and I actually brought along a visual aid to show this.
That's great, Doctor. Your Honor, can we screen share a visual aid? It's been shown to counsel before trial. Your Honor, may we share the visual aid?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, is there an objection to this, Ms. Peterson?
No objections, Your Honor.
Then please go ahead.
Now, Doctor, you just mentioned that some things made you think it wasn't alcohol poisoning. Could you explain this further using your visual aid?
Yes. So as you can see, on one side, there are the symptoms of alcohol poisoning. And then on the other side, there's Genesis Petrio symptoms. Now, I've circled several symptoms here that are not consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Doctor, what symptoms aren't consistent with alcohol poisoning that Genesis had?
Well, what really stood out to me at first that really made me think that it wasn't alcohol poisoning were that Miss Petrio's pupils were contracted, which is the opposite of what you'd find in an alcohol poisoning case. Furthermore, she was excessively tearing. She was having muscle spasms, which is not consistent with alcohol poisoning. And finally, she had a slowed pulse, and which was not consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Thank you. You can unshare the screen. Now, Doctor, once you looked at the symptoms that were different from alcohol poisoning, were you able to see if there was anything else that could have caused her symptoms?
Yes. At this point, her symptoms were consistent with organophosphate poisoning or pesticide poisoning.
Well, Doctor, I'm going to go through exactly why that might be. What happens to the human body when someone's poisoned by a pesticide?
Well, at first, the digestive system begins to break down, so they may have stomach pain and vomiting. And then after that, the nervous system begins to break down. And so that's when you see those contracted pupils and tearing. And then if the symptoms deteriorate to a dire rate, then they may have respiratory issues, which cause coughing fits that can lead to death.
Now, Doctor, what did you do once you thought it could have been pesticide poisoning?
Well, once I thought it could have been pesticide poisoning because Miss Petrio's body was exhibiting those exact symptoms, I conducted testing to confirm this, but at this point, Miss Petrio seemed to be in the respiratory failure stage, so I administered the antidote.
Did the antidote work?
Unfortunately, no. The antidote did not work. A few minutes after I administered it, Miss Petrio began to have a coughing fit that led to a seizure, and she fell into a coma. Then later that morning, Miss Petrio passed away.
Now, ma'am, you mentioned that you had conducted testing for pesticide poisoning, and I want to go back a little bit. Were you able to get the results of those tests to confirm whether or not it was pesticide poisoning?
Yes, I was. Both the test of her vomit sample and also of her blood indicated that this was organophosphate poisoning.
Now, Doctor, I want to take a step back, and I want to ask exactly how could a pesticide enter a person's system?
Well, there are 3 ways, and I brought along a visual aid to show this.
Your Honor, can we share the screen for another visual aid?
You may. Feel free to just do that without asking for the time being, both counsel.
Of course.
Of exhibits, of course.
Now, Doctor, you mentioned that there are 3 ways a pesticide can enter a person's body. Could you describe them for us?
Yes. So as you can see here, there's skin contact, there's inhalation through the air, and finally there's ingestion through food or drink.
Were you able to rule out any of these types of exposure?
Yes, I was able to rule out contact because I wasn't able to see any marks on Miss Petrio's skin. And then I was also able to rule out inhalation. So at that point, I knew it could be ingestion.
Now, doctor, were you able to find out how exactly she could have ingested a pesticide?
Yes, based on the results of the test, Miss Petrillo ingested the pesticide through the wine she drank.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honor. And we can unshare that too.
Thank you. Ms. Pearson, you have any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Witness is with you.
Good morning, Dr. Kwan.
Good morning.
Now, you're on the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions, right?
Yes, I am.
And this is a group that advocates against the use of chemical pesticides, right?
Yes, that's true. Pesticides have a detrimental effect on food products, and as we can see in this case, it has a detrimental effect on the human body.
So you would agree that today's case with the cause of death being tied to pesticide poisoning is very important to this group?
Yes, I would agree that this case is an example of why we should not be allowing pesticide poisonings to go unregulated.
And you're actually hoping that today's case will help convince legislators to outright ban the use of chemical pesticides, right?
Yes, I am. As we can see in this case, pesticides are fatal and they need to be regulated.
Okay, Dr. Kwan, so let's move on to the night in question. You initially admitted Petrillo to the hospital suspecting a case of alcohol poisoning, right?
Yes, I did initially suspect alcohol poisoning, but I realized later that that wasn't the case.
But prior to your full examination, Petrillo was exhibiting symptoms that were consistent with alcohol poisoning, correct?
On my initial examination, yes, she was, but once I took a closer look, she wasn't.
And Petrillo confirmed to you that she had in fact been drinking wine that evening?
Yes, she didn't actually say this to me, but I could tell because of her vomit and also later the blood alcohol test.
So during your full examination, then you noted symptoms that were inconsistent with alcohol poisoning, correct?
Yes, that's right, including the contracted pupils and then later the muscle spasms.
Right, so this led you to order the poisons and toxins analysis alongside the regular toxicology report, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So when Petrillo passed away, you noted her cause of death as respiratory failure due to pesticide poisoning, correct?
Yes, I did.
But you noted this cause of death before any of the test results were returned. Is that right?
Well, I ended up being correct, but yes, that's true. And because of her symptoms that were exactly consistent with organophosphate poisoning, I was able to make that determination correctly.
Okay, so after the cause of death was noted, Petrillo's test results returned a BAC of 0.16. Is that right?
Yes, and that BAC is absolutely inconsistent with a death by alcohol poisoning.
But this level of BAC can cause significant symptoms. Is that right?
It can. It didn't cause the symptoms that Ms. Petrillo showed.
But it can cause symptoms such as nausea and vomiting, right?
Yes, a lot of things can cause nausea and vomiting.
Okay, Dr. Kwan. Now, another thing that you noted concern about was Petrillo having low levels of acetylcholinesterase, correct?
Yes, and that's exactly why I thought it was consistent with organophosphate poisoning.
But cholinesterase enzyme levels can be lowered by other health factors. Is that right?
That's true, but because of the symptoms that Ms. Petrillo showed, I was able to reasonably infer, and correctly also, that this was a pesticide poisoning.
Okay, now I want to shift gears and talk about Petrillo's stomach contents that were tested that night.
Sure.
So any food and drink items that Petrillo consumed that night would have dissolved in her stomach. Is that right?
Yes, that is possible.
Along with the can of wine that she consumed.
Yes, and that what was in her stomach contents.
Right, and then these dissolved items would then have mixed together in Petrillo's stomach. Is that right?
I'm so sorry, you're out of time.
And no further questions, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Milcutt, do you have any redirect?
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Okay.
Dr. Kwan, is a BAC of 0.16 high enough to cause alcohol poisoning?
No, it's not, especially not a death by alcohol poisoning, no.
Nothing further.
All right. I just want to note for the record, and counsel, please correct me if I'm wrong, in this jurisdiction, the witness is not required nor permitted to be formally tendered as an expert. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Thank you. I was puzzled by that, but it's good to see that that's the rule. So, does the plaintiff have any more witnesses?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests our case in chief.
Okay. Does this jurisdiction require, permit any motions at the close of the plaintiff's case?
No, Your Honor. No motions are permitted.
All right. Do the parties need a recess before proceeding to the defense's case?
Could we please have a brief, maybe 5-minute recess?
Sure. We'll get back here at 11:30. We'll resume.
Thank you.
All right, it is 11:30. That was quicker than I thought. My watch is a little slow, so if people still need a couple more minutes, we'll give it to you. But if you're ready to proceed, you can let me know and we can get the show on the road. So,
Yes, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed.
okay.
At this
Your Honor.
time, the defense.
I'm sorry, Ms. Polk, go ahead.
At this time, the defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
Okay. And did Ms. Farron, you see your name has changed. So are you good to proceed as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, great. And Ms. Osborne, was that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
You understand that you're under oath as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Polk, the witnesses and the jury with you.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Osborne?
I'm a private event planner here in Rapid Rear Valley, Midlands. I actually own Bliss by Blair Events, the best event planning service in the area. We've actually been named the #1 most highly recommended event planning service in the area by Savior Magazine, not just once, but 4 times.
How do you know Harper Martini?
I met Harper and her daughter Casey in 2015 when Harper came to my rescue. You see, as an event planner, I tend to be a little bit overwhelmed with so many different fabulous projects. And I was a little bit stressed out because I double booked myself. And luckily, Harper was there and offered her own winery, Peony Estates, as an alternate venue for an event. She was a lifesaver, and we made a lasting business relationship after that.
You mentioned being an event planner. Were you involved in planning the wedding of Harper's daughter, Casey?
Yes, I was honored when Harper asked me to help because I felt like I was planning for family.
Could you tell the members of the jury what your interactions were like with Harper while planning the wedding?
Harper was very involved in the wedding planning process. She didn't initially tell Casey about my involvement, but I figured she just wanted to keep it a surprise, that she hired the best event planner in Midlands.
When did Casey find out that you were involved?
I met with Casey and her fiance at first in the beginning of January of 2019. It was a very pleasant meeting, and Casey seemed to be happy with the work I'd done so far, but I mean, who wouldn't be?
Did Harper mention to you how she felt about Genesis and Casey's relationship?
Well, she made it pretty clear she wasn't a big fan of their relationship. But in the end, I just think she wanted what made Casey happy, which was apparent by how involved she was with the wedding planning. I see this a lot with mother-in-laws at wedding planning. They just want everything to be perfect.
How did the planning of the wedding go after your initial meeting with Casey and Genesis?
There was a bit of confusion between Genesis, Harper, and I, but nothing I couldn't handle as the #1 event planning service in the area. And it's actually pretty common. But then I just started to focus on the rehearsal dinner. Getting those centerpieces figured out was such a nightmare.
And how did the rehearsal dinner go?
Not to toot my own horn, but the rehearsal dinner was spectacular. Everything was beautiful, especially those centerpieces I mentioned earlier. And Harper and Genesis seemed to finally start getting along.
How are they getting along?
Well, Harper was very eager to smooth things over with Genesis. To my surprise, she even presented Genesis
to speculation as to what Ms. Martini seemed to want to do.
Okay, Ms. Polk, can you repeat the question for me?
Yes, I asked Ms. Osborne how she saw Harper and Genesis getting along at the rehearsal dinner.
And Ms. Farron, you contend that there was something wrong in the witness's answer?
Yes, Your Honor. The witness said that Ms. Martini seemed to want to mend the relationship / get better with Ms. Petrillo, and I argue that that's speculation.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection for the moment and allow this line of questioning to proceed. And if it gets significantly worse, you're welcome to raise it again, and we'll revisit it at that time. But for the moment, overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. I'm going to re-ask my question. How are they getting along, Ms. Osborne?
Harper seemed very eager. She seemed very eager to smooth things over with Genesis. To my surprise, she even presented him with a beautiful bottle of wine from her own winery in front of everyone. It was a pretty big gesture.
Did the gesture of giving the bottle of wine raise any concern to you?
No, not at all. It was actually a very moving moment that actually made me tear up a bit, which is kind of rare for an event planner because we see so many different things. But it truly showed how much Harper loved Casey. In that moment, it was apparent to me that Harper decided to leave all her drama with Genesis in the past and just move forward.
Did Genesis seem to enjoy the wine?
Yes, I believe so. I saw Genesis pouring several glasses of wine in front of the other guests. I even reminded Genesis to drink some water before bed because I've had to deal with a lot of hungover grooms and brides at weddings. And let me just tell you, it's not a pretty picture. And I had a feeling that Genesis might be hungover the next day, which would be unacceptable for the wedding.
How did the next day go?
Harper seemed very eager for the wedding and just wanted everything to be perfect for Casey. She even told me, "I just want the wedding to be as wonderful as your marriage will be." I thought this was very sweet of Harper, but unfortunately,
Hearsay?
Okay, we have an objection to hearsay. Which, go ahead with your argument.
I'm objecting to the statement from Ms. Martini about how she was excited for the wedding.
Okay. Ms. Paulson?
Your Honor.
I'm sorry, if there's more, Ms. Farron, go ahead.
Your Honor, just an out-of-court statement being made for the truth of the matter asserted.
Okay.
Your Honor, this is an exception to hearsay because this is from our party opponent, Ms. Harper Martini.
Your Honor, the defense's party opponent is not Ms. Martini. That's the party opponent.
Isn't Ms. Martini the defendant? Is that right?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes,
it's the defendant's party representative.
Okay. Yeah.
Our party representative. My apologies, Your Honor.
Yeah. Okay. So the objection will be sustained.
Permission to strike that line of testimony?
Motion is allowed. Feel free to proceed.
Thank you.
What happened the next day, Ms. Osborne?
well, Angel Rodriguez came in and told Casey that Genesis was in a coma. So naturally, the wedding, which we all worked so hard for, was canceled. And we eventually learned that, unfortunately, Genesis had passed away. I've heard rumors that Harper was somehow involved with the poisoning of Genesis, but I just don't believe it.
Why don't you believe this, Ms. Osborne?
Well, for starters, I've never seen anything but the highest standards of hygiene and safety when it comes to peony estates. Otherwise, I wouldn't be associated with them at all. Additionally, Harper is one of the most kind people I've ever met. She loved Casey so much and just wanted the wedding to go flawlessly.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. Ms. Farron, do you have any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Witness is with you.
Ms. Osborne, you testified on direct examination that Ms. Martini came to your rescue, right?
Yes, she did, thankfully.
And you don't think that Ms. Martini poisoned Ms. Petrillo?
No, I honestly, in my personal opinion, I don't believe she would be capable of that.
In fact, no amount of evidence could convince you that Ms. Martini poisoned Ms. Petrillo. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I've known her so long and I can't imagine it.
And you saw some conflicts between Ms. Martini and Ms. Petrillo during the wedding planning process, right?
Yeah, it's actually not unusual with mother-in-laws and wedding planning. There's always a lot of disagreements.
And Ms. Martini even played you a voicemail that Ms. Petrillo left her.
Yes, I believe that Genesis might have been drunk in that voicemail. It was pretty harsh.
Yeah, you characterized this voicemail as terrible, right?
Yes.
And after Ms. Martini played you that voicemail, she said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis, right?
Objection, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yep.
This is a statement of our party opponent. So according to 801 D2A, this is admissible.
The statement in question is left on a voicemail from the defendant, by the defendant, is that right?
The statement in question was Ms. Martini's statement that she made to Ms. Osborne after playing the message.
Okay. Ms. Polk, anything about that?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. The objection is overruled. Please proceed.
Ms. Osborne, I'll ask you that question again. After Ms. Martini played you this voicemail, she said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis.
She did, but we all say things when we're upset, and I personally don't believe she meant it.
But I want to be clear, Ms. Osborne, those were the exact words that Ms. Martini used, right?
Yes, they were.
Now, I want to talk about the rehearsal dinner. At dinner, you saw Ms. Martini and Ms. Petrillo get into a fight, right?
Yes, they were disagreeing.
And you described this fight as a boiling point, correct?
Yes, I would say it's when the tensions rose a little bit, yes.
And after this boiling point, you saw Ms. Martini give Ms. Petrillo a bottle of wine.
Yes, I thought it was a very sweet gesture.
And was when Ms. Martini gave Ms. Petrillo that wine, she said, I got this just for you, right?
Yes, I believe it was her way of making amends.
And Ms. Osborne, I'm not asking you what you believe, but right after saying that, Ms. Martini also said, but don't open it in front of other people. Isn't that correct?
Yes, she did.
And you saw Ms. Petrillo open this bottle of wine and drink from it.
Yes, I saw her pouring several glasses, but I don't know how many she drank.
You didn't see anybody else except Ms. Petrillo drink from that bottle of wine, correct?
No, I didn't.
And later on the morning of the wedding, you found out that Ms. Petrillo had died, right?
Yes, unfortunately.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
No redirect, Your Honor. I ask that this witness be excused.
All right. Ms. Osborne, you may step down. Does the offense
Your
have
Honor.
other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
Dr. Cannon? All right, good morning. You may proceed with your question.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
I'm
Hello,
so
my
sorry, Your
name is
Honor. Could we
Dr.
just have a few minutes to switch?
I'm sorry?
Your Honor, if we could just have a few minutes to
I'm
figure
so
out our
sorry.
argument. No worries, Your Honor. Thank you.
My apologies, Ms. Peterson. I forgot about that. Let's make sure that y'all's time is stopped and let the plaintiff get situated.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
I'm all ready to go, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Grevin. Ms. Peterson, go ahead and proceed.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Dr. Rebecca Cannon.
And what do you do for a living, Dr. Cannon?
Well, my real passion is teaching. I was at Midlands Med from 2005 to 2014. Eventually, I shifted into consulting work because, well, frankly, it pays better. That's what I've been doing ever since. I specialize in toxicology and pharmacology.
And could you tell us the difference between toxicology and pharmacology?
Yeah, I actually get this question a lot. Essentially, pharmacology is the study of chemicals working for our body, and toxicology is the study of chemicals working against it.
Now, would you tell the court a little about your educational background?
Sure. I got my Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry from The Ohio State University, and then went on to get my MD from Harvard School of Medicine in 1996.
And have you ever been published in your field?
Yes, I, as a professor, got to work on a lot of really fun research projects with some of my students. So I've actually been published over 50 times, usually on the subject of toxicology.
Okay, so moving to today's case, what is your involvement?
I was asked to review the expert report of Dr. Jimin Kwan and provide my own findings on the case regarding the death of Genesis Petrillo.
And how did you go about reviewing that report?
Well, I use the gold standard in the field of consulting, the process of comparative analysis. Essentially, I read over Dr. Kwan's report and compared it to best practice.
And did you reliably apply that method?
I did.
And what materials did you rely on to come to your conclusions?
I was given the expert report of Dr. Kwan, along with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez and any relevant exhibits.
Were these materials sufficient?
Yes, these are the kinds of materials my colleagues and I always use in cases like this.
Okay, Dr. Cannon. So when you were reviewing Dr. Kwan's report, was there anything that stuck out to you?
Well, Dr. Kwan seems to believe that the death of Genesis Petrillo is an open and shut poisoning case. Now, I'd worked with Dr. Kwan before, and I have the utmost faith in his ability as a doctor. However, there were several questions raised for me as I went through his report.
What questions did you have?
Well, to be more specific, I think there are at least 3 other explanations as to what could have happened to Genesis on July 7th. Specifically, alcohol poisoning, allergic reaction, or a pre-existing condition.
Okay, I'd like to break those down one by one. So what led you to suspect that Petrillo could have had a pre-existing condition?
Well, Dr. Kwan noted a couple of symptoms that Ms. Petrillo was experiencing that led him to diagnose her with pesticide exposure. Now, while this is definitely a possibility, I actually have seen cases of liver disease mimic these symptoms to a T.
What are those symptoms?
Well, liver disease messes with how the body processes alcohol. So Petrillo likely would have had weird symptoms for someone who had just been drinking, like constricted pupils, slowed heart rate, etc., when the symptoms of alcohol poisoning are usually the opposite. Now, this is due to lower levels of acetylcholinesterase, the compound that coincidentally is affected by organophosphates as well.
Now, can this condition be fatal?
On its own, it's extremely unlikely. However, with long-term drinking or any kind of exposure to substances, it's definitely a possibility.
And is it possible that Petrillo could have been living with this condition without knowing it?
It's definitely possible. The symptoms of liver disease can sometimes be really mild and go undetected for years. Genesis' medical records reflect that she hadn't had a checkup in a while.
Okay, so let's move on to the next possible explanation. Why is an allergic reaction a possibility?
So allergies are actually super fascinating. My favorite course that I taught at Midlands Med was on allergies and food. What I always tell people that ask me about allergies is that it's one of the things in the medical field that's evolving the most rapidly. We learn new things about allergies every single day. In my opinion, it's something that should be considered for any poisoning case.
And why is that?
Well, allergies are a lot like teenagers. They can be unpredictable and moody. You never really know when they're going to flare up. And a lot of times, allergic reactions can mimic the symptoms of poisoning.
How likely is it that Petrillo suffered an allergic reaction on June 7th?
It's not super likely that Petrillo would have experienced some kind of anaphylaxis without a rash or some kind of inflammation. But since she was sampling a lot of different foods and drinks at a buffet the night before she died, I absolutely can't rule it out.
Now, let's move on to alcohol poisoning. Why did you consider this as a possible cause of death?
Out of all of the possible alternative explanations that we've talked about today, I think that this is probably the most likely. Dr. Kwan actually initially admitted Genesis for a possible alcohol poisoning case, but ruled it out since the symptoms were somewhat inconsistent. I think that this was ultimately pretty hasty.
Why do you think this was hasty?
Well, while I acknowledge that Petrillo's BAC reflected 0.16, which is not generally considered to be life-threatening, it is worth noting that her blood was tested many hours after she stopped drinking.
And why is that important?
Well, her body was likely in an elimination state at that point, and 0.16 may not be an accurate measurement of her peak BAC. I brought along a chart that kind of demonstrates this.
Ms. Polk, would you please share demonstrative aid marked for Dr. Cannon? So, Dr. Cannon, what are we looking at here?
So this chart reflects every possibility for Genesis's BAC the night of June 7th. The orange line reflects the most likely trajectory of alcohol in her bloodstream, showing her BAC continue to climb as she was drinking and begin to drop back off again as her liver processes that ethanol. The blue line reflects the body in the absorption phase, but
as to lack of foundation, this witness is not able to establish this point that these BAC levels represent Genesis's specific BAC. This expert can testify generally about what BAC does, but has laid no foundation of how she's able to actually calculate Genesis's BAC levels.
Peterson?
If I may respond.
Yeah, please.
Dr. Cannon is not using this chart to claim that these points represent Petrio's BAC. She's simply using this to show a trajectory of what BAC typically behaves like.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
Sure.
The witness specifically said that these lines mark all possible levels of BAC that Genesis Petrio could have had. She made a specific link between the victim's BAC to this chart, and that's what I'm objecting to.
Yeah, that was what I thought was happening as well. So maybe what I can do, I can instruct the jury that this chart is mainly representative of changes in BAC over time, and are not necessarily, and are not representative of the victim's BAC the day of. Would that cure the issue?
Yes, Your Honor. I would also ask that the statements linking Genesis Petrio to this chart be struck from the record.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we'll allow that, and I'll instruct the jury constructively on both those points then. So formally, then the objection is sustained, and instruction is given. The motion is allowed. Ms. Peterson, you may proceed.
Okay. So, Dr. Cannon, as you were saying, what exactly is this chart telling us?
Yeah, so this chart reflects kind of what Genesis's BAC could have looked like on that night. Now, the orange line reflects the most likely trajectory, and the blue line reflects...
I'm sorry, Mr. Grevin.
I re-raise my objection of this witness specifically linking BAC to Genesis Petrio.
Yeah.
The foundation has been laid.
I'm going to sustain the objection. I think that it's still a little too tight, Ms. Peterson and Dr. Cannon. Perhaps you can find a way to talk about how BAC works generally. And then if she's qualified, Ms. Cannon can offer an opinion about the victim's BAC in this case. But I think using the chart and saying this is what it could look like has the tendency to confuse the jury. So because it's confusing me. So the objection is sustained.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Motion allowed.
Okay, Dr. Cannon, what can this chart tell us about BAC generally?
Sure. So again, the orange line reflects a body in the trajectory of an elimination state, showing the line begin to climb as the person is drinking and begin to drop back off again as their body processes the ethanol. Now, the blue line reflects a body in the absorption phase, but I was able to rule this out with a reasonable degree of scientific certainty.
Why were you able to rule that out?
Well, in order for Genesis's blood to follow the trajectory of absorption, Genesis would need to continue to drink all night long. According to everything I reviewed, she didn't drink anything after 12:42 a.m.
And what does that mean?
Objection, Your Honor, lack of foundation. This witness has not established the basis for which she's making the conclusion that Genesis did not drink. She can testify to she learned from a particular source or report as to what she can drink, but she lacks the personal knowledge to be able to make a categorical claim about Genesis Petrio's alcohol consumption.
Peterson.
Yes, Your Honor. At the beginning of Dr. Cannon's testimony, she told the court that she reviewed all of the materials that Dr. Kwan was working with, such as the testimony of Angel Rodriguez, which is what she's referring to here.
So she is revealing the basis. So she's revealed the basis for her opinion that that the BAC is what it is, based upon the statement of witnesses that she was no longer drinking. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, statements that were made in the materials that Dr. Cannon reviewed.
Okay.
Your Honor, but in this witness's testimony, she did not establish that. She said that Genesis Petrio only had consumed a certain amount of alcohol and did not explain the basis of that source.
If I may respond.
Sure.
Dr. Cannon reviewed Dr. Kwan's report as well, so she would have had access to the information Dr. Kwan reported, and Dr. Kwan did in fact report the information that Angel Rodriguez told her regarding the drinking that night.
Sure. I think Mr. Grevin's issue is that Dr. Cannon rather, hasn't specifically said that's where she got that from, but I'm also not sure it's required. And so, Mr. Grevin, you'll be free to examine the doctor on the basis of her opinion, have her disclose where she got her facts from when it's during the cross-examination. But at this time, the objection is overruled, and you may proceed with your question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, so Dr. Cannon, what exactly does this mean?
Essentially, it means that Genesis's BAC was likely much higher earlier in the night.
And what did this lead you to believe?
Well, while I acknowledge that Dr. Kwan's explanation for Genesis's death is a possibility, and that it is slightly more likely than the alternative explanations that I offered, this doesn't mean that it's the only possibility, or that it's even likely at all. I think that this case is probably much more complicated than Dr. Kwan acknowledges, and I would have hesitated to provide a definitive cause of death at all.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Excuse me. Mr. Grevin, would you like to do some cross-examining?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, the witness is with you.
So, Dr. Cannon, I want to first talk about some things that you didn't do in this case.
Okay.
You didn't perform any tests on any related to Genesis Petrillo or blood alcohol content tests in this case, right?
No, I'm a consultant. I look over reports and give my opinion.
You didn't examine the body.
No, that would be very improper.
You didn't interview a single person, right?
No, again, not super common for my line of work.
You mentioned that you relied on your conclusions based on Angel Rodriguez's report, right? About her BAC level, how much alcohol she consumed?
Yes.
Yet you never interviewed Angel Rodriguez personally, right?
No, my understanding of an affidavit is that somebody is supposed to include everything that they saw and heard, so I trust the information that's contained within it.
But Ms. Rodriguez was not with Genesis Petrillo the entire night, right?
Not to my understanding, but she was there at the hospital, which is the period of time that I'm mostly concerned with.
But you said you relied exclusively on Angel Rodriguez's report to determine how much alcohol Genesis Petrillo drank that night, right?
I wasn't attempting to determine how much alcohol Genesis drank. I was just trying to determine whether or not Genesis had drank more than a BAC of 0.16, which is definitely a possibility.
Dr. Cannon, are you saying that the amount a person drinks is irrelevant to their BAC level?
Not at all. It's just not what I was trying to figure out today.
So you did not think the amount that Genesis Petrillo consumed was relevant?
Not what I said. It's just not my job to figure it out. I'm not a medical doctor anymore. I'm a consultant.
Now, Dr. Cannon, I want to talk a little bit about the BAC chart that you put up. So in order to come up with a BAC level, you need to know that person's height, right?
Yes, but again, I wasn't trying to figure out peak BAC, just trying to illustrate the fact that Genesis's BAC could have been higher.
But you don't know Genesis Petrillo's height.
No, again, I didn't need to know it to see that she was drinking earlier in the night and likely had a higher BAC.
Well, Dr. Cannon, I'm a little confused. In order to determine what a likely peak BAC would have been, right, you would need to know how accurate the BAC levels are, right?
Again, was not trying to figure out a likely peak BAC.
So you're not testifying to the likelihood at all of Genesis Petrillo's BAC level, right?
No, I was just given the information of what her BAC actually was when it was taken and witnesses' statements as to what her drinking looked like on that night. I'm just here to introduce the possibility that she could have had alcohol poisoning.
So to be clear, you're talking about what could have happened, but you're not talking about what likely happened, right?
I'm talking about what could have happened just to explore all possibilities.
Well, let's talk about some of your other explored possibilities. You reviewed Genesis Petrillo's medical records, right?
I did.
And you found no evidence that she has any allergies, right?
Correct. But again, like I said, allergies can be really moody and unpredictable. And I always check for allergies whenever a poisoning case comes to me.
There was no rash or any other medical sign on Genesis Petrillo that indicated that she had an allergic reaction, right?
No, but it's not an impossibility that somebody would suffer an allergic reaction without showing any physical symptoms. I've seen it a couple of times before.
You also talked about a rare liver disease, but that also wasn't in Genesis Petria's medical records, right?
Correct. The liver disease thing was mostly just to explore her low levels of acetylcholinesterase, introducing another possibility.
And you found absolutely no evidence that she suffered from that liver disease on the night in question.
No affirmative evidence, but her low levels of acetylcholinesterase did clue me in that she could have had liver disease.
And Dr. Cannon, when you say no affirmative evidence, you mean no evidence, right?
Not no evidence. Low levels of acetylcholinesterase would be considered evidence, but I can't use it to affirmatively diagnose her with liver disease.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you are aware that Genesis Petria consumed alcohol on the night of the wedding rehearsal dinner, right?
Yes, I am aware.
She consumed alcohol from a bottle of Carl wine.
Yes.
When you tested that bottle of wine, you're aware that that bottle of wine tested positive for pesticides, right?
Correct.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you believe that pesticide poisoning is the most likely cause of death in today's case, right?
More likely than the other explanations I've offered, but again, more likely doesn't make it likely at all.
So that's a yes. You think it's the most likely explanation for her death, right?
Yes.
And you also believe that the pesticide poisoning, the most likely explanation for pesticide poisoning is from the bottle of wine that Harper Martini provided to Genesis Petria.
Again, most likely, but definitely not the only possible explanation.
That's a yes to my question?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Direct.
No, Your Honor. I just ask that at this time this witness be allowed to step down.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon, for your time. You may step down. Ms. Peterson, does the defense have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand.
Ms. Martini, good afternoon. You understand the under oath?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. York, let's give a moment for Ms. Melcote to be ready. And when she is, you can proceed with your questioning.
Your Honor, am I good to begin?
I'm ready now. Thank you.
Please introduce yourselves to the court.
Hi, my name's Harper Martini.
Ms. Martini, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm originally from California, where my family had this awesome winemaking business, but I moved here to Midlands in the 80s to get myself out of California. And now I own my own wine business right here in Midlands.
And can you tell us about your winery?
Yeah, of course. It's a family business called Peony Estates Winery, named after my favorite flower.
And speaking of family, would you please describe yours?
Yeah, there's not really much to tell. I have one son named Casey, and he's my everything. He's all I have here because I was never married to his dad. We were supposed to be adding to our little family here recently because Casey was engaged, but that didn't happen.
And can you describe your relationship with Casey?
Of course. Casey's my only child, so he's my everything. He's the absolute apple of my eye, and nothing matters more to me than his happiness. We spent all of our time together when Casey was younger, but when he got engaged, him and Genesis were pretty much connected at the hip, which got a little frustrating when I wanted to spend alone time with Casey.
And can you talk a little bit about Casey and Genesis's relationship?
Well, I could tell how much they loved each other just by being around them. Everybody could. They eventually got engaged, but unfortunately, Genesis died the night before the wedding. Genesis and I never really got along, but I knew how much Casey loved her, so I managed to be cordial for Casey's sake.
So how was your relationship with Genesis?
Even from the beginning, it was rocky. The first thing Genesis ever said to me was an insult about my winery, but what hurt most was when Casey laughed at the remark. But that's not even the beginning of it.
And did you approve of this relationship?
No, Genesis was always getting Casey into some sort of trouble. Casey even got alcohol poisoning out with Genesis one time.
Objection, Your Honor?
But
to relevance?
Stuart? I'm sorry. Back up. Ms. Milko, which part of the testimony do you feel is irrelevant?
Yes, Your Honor, specifically to the testimony that Casey got alcohol poisoning when she was out with Genesis one day. Your Honor, this is irrelevant to make any fact in this case more or less likely. And Your Honor, whether or not she got alcohol poisoning with Genesis does not make any difference. And additionally, Your Honor, under 403, it is more prejudicial than probative.
Okay, Mr. York?
Your Honor, Ms. Martini is simply just laying foundation with the relationship between Genesis and Casey.
May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, they've already laid that foundation. This witness already said she didn't like Genesis. She already said Genesis was a bad influence on her son. And Your Honor, they don't need that additional testimony that Casey got alcohol poisoning when she was out with Genesis. All that does is serve to prejudice the jury against my client, the estate of Genesis Petrillo, and saying that she was some kind of alcoholic or some kind of specific, she engaged in some kind of specific incident like that.
So there's been a great deal of discussion in this case about the relationship between this witness and the deceased. I think it's relevant, therefore, to explore the reason for that, the basis for that relationship. Mr. York, I am concerned, though, with prejudicial effect that testimony about a prior case of alcohol poisoning will have on the jury as they consider the facts of this case. Can you speak to that at all?
All that the witness is trying, I mean, this information is relevant because it does give background on the relationship.
Right.
About the prejudicial. I got nothing.
Okay. Well, then I will, that's all right. I will allow, well, I'm going to overrule the objection. I'm going to allow a little bit of exploration for the basis of the relationship, but keep it short and sweet to avoid the prejudicial effect that it's going to have. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to re-ask my question. Did you approve of the relationship?
no, not at all. Like I said, Casey, no, sorry. Oh my goodness. Genesis was always getting Casey into trouble. But it was when their wedding eventually rolled around that Genesis really started to act up.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, Genesis seemed to always be doing everything she could to make me angry.
Objection,
She
Your Honor?
planned the
To speculation?
Stuart, this is to, I'm sorry, flesh out your argument, Ms. Milko.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just testified that Genesis was doing everything she could to make Miss Martini angry. There's no way this witness could possibly know what Genesis was thinking or feeling or her intentions on the day of the wedding. She can testify to what she saw or heard, but that Genesis was doing everything she could to get under her skin, that is far beyond any rationally based perception.
Yeah, the use of the word seemed is tricky. I think I let one go during your case in chief where the witness was testifying about how someone seemed. So I'm going to allow it here. The objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to re-ask my question. What did you mean by Genesis was acting up?
Well, like I said, it seemed like she was doing everything she could to kind of get under my skin and make me angry. She had planned to have the wedding at my rival winery, and disagreed with every single suggestion that I made about the wedding planning. Then Genesis left me a voicemail in May that really made me upset the most.
Now, did you ever try to make amends with Genesis?
Yes, multiple times actually. I wanted to have a good relationship with Genesis for Casey's sake because she was going to be part of our family. In January, I tried to set up a lunch with Genesis, but she kept pushing it off.
And did you ever make amends?
Yes, I did actually. Casey had asked me multiple times to bury the hatchet, and so eventually I decided to extend an olive branch to Genesis.
And what was this olive branch?
Well, every year my winery makes a special batch of wine that's different from anything we've ever made. Genesis had enjoyed a type of wine that was very similar to it during a wedding wine tasting. And so I thought, what better gift to give to Genesis than the first bottle? And Casey had even named it Cara, which I thought was kind of cute.
Now, can you tell us about the rehearsal dinner?
Yeah. So there was so much going on, I kind of misjudged my timing a little bit. When I came upstairs from grabbing the wine bottle for Genesis from the cellar, the kitchen was in a huge uproar. I decided to hand off the wine to Sam Arnold because I had something I needed to take care of.
And what was that?
One of my employees saw a cockroach in the kitchen, so I decided to go and spray it just to avoid any unexpected surprises on anybody's dinner plate.
Sorry, Your Honor, I'm having connection issues. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can.
Earlier, we heard a few people say that you gave the wine to Genesis, but did you handle the wine at all after giving it to
Objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, under Rule 615, during pre-trial, this witness was not designated as being present during the trial. We asked that all the witnesses be constructively sequestered. The witness wasn't designated as their party representative to be present in trial.
I do recall that. We did exclude, just a moment.
Your Honor, I'd just like to clarify, we did do that.
Yes, so we did exclude the witnesses. Now 615 does not authorize the exclusion of the party representative. Am I correct that Ms. Martini is the defendant herself? Am I right about that?
Yes, Your Honor, but during pre-trial, the defense did not say that she would be present in the courtroom. We asked that all of the witnesses be excluded. There is no instruction for this witness to be present today, even if 615 allows them to be present.
Yeah, that's a tough factor when we're dealing with Zoom. So the text of 615 says, this rule does not authorize constructively excluding a party who is a natural person. I'm with you, Ms. Melcote. You guys asked to exclude everybody. I asked the defense, are you going to accept? Do you want to have a problem with that? The defense said, no, we're fine with that. In a non-Zoom setting, we'd be able to see physically if the party opponent was present. We'd be able to have dealt with that. Since we're not able to do that, and since the rule does not authorize the constructive exclusion of the party herself, I'm going to say that this particular individual was exempt from that order, and the questioning can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, did you handle the wine at all after giving it to Sam Arnold?
No, I didn't. I handed it off to Sam, and I didn't see it again until Genesis received it. So Sam was the one who gave it to Genesis.
And what happened next?
Well, the rest of the dinner was perfect. The food was great, and everybody's toasts and speeches were amazing. It was a night that I'll definitely never forget, but for more than one reason.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, Genesis and I were finally on good terms, and Casey was so happy. But so I left around 10:30 because everything was going well. But around 2:30 in the morning, I got a panicked call from an employee.
And what was the phone call about?
Well, they said somebody had been rushed to the hospital, so I assumed that it might be Genesis or somebody else in the wedding party. So I rushed back to the winery to see what was going on.
And what did you do when you got to the winery?
I went up to Genesis's room to check, and there was nobody there. All I could see was the empty bottle of Cara on the floor. I was so mad that the wedding might now be ruined. I ripped off the label and threw it in the trash.
Ms. Martini, you're accused by the Petrillo family of causing Genesis's death. What do you have to say to that?
I would never do anything like that. As I said before, Casey's the apple of my eye. Nothing matters more to me than her happiness. Everything I do is for Casey, and I just want the best for him. I would never do anything to hurt him, especially kill his fiance.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. York. Ms. Melko, do you have any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Can we have one moment to get demonstrative set up on the demonstrative screen?
You may.
Um, Sorry, one moment, Your Honor.
That's fine.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Ms. Martini, on May 12th of 2019, Genesis Petrillo sent you a voicemail, right?
Yes.
You can wait one moment to screen share. Or you'd recognize that voicemail if I were to show it to you?
Yes.
This is the voice. Your Honor, may I constructively share my screen to show the voicemail? I believe it's already been shared.
Yeah.
And Your Honor, this exhibit has been pre-admitted into evidence.
Okay, that happened as a result of a pretrial matter, or?
Your Honor, it was stipulated to in the stipulations before this trial even happened.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you received this voicemail on May 12th of 2019, right?
Yes.
And in this voicemail, Genesis told you that she was moving to France.
Correct.
She told you she was taking Casey with her.
Yes.
And she told you you would never see her again.
Yeah, Genesis did say that, and it hurt me a lot.
Right. Casey was the sun to your planet.
Sure, you can say that, I guess.
You two were close, right?
Yeah, he was my only child.
And that's when you realized that Genesis was the biggest mistake in Casey's life.
I don't know if that's when I realized it. Genesis had done a lot of things before that, but it was definitely a moment where I was pretty fed up with Genesis.
Ma'am, it was a moment where you thought Genesis was the biggest mistake in Casey's life.
Sure.
And you knew that you wanted nothing more than to stop that wedding.
If Genesis was going to move across the ocean with Casey, I didn't want them to get married.
So you wanted nothing more than to stop that wedding.
I wouldn't say nothing more, but I definitely didn't want them to get married.
Is it your testimony that you didn't want nothing more than to stop that wedding?
Sorry, I'm just a little bit confused. Can you ask the question again?
Ma'am, you wanted nothing more than to stop that wedding.
Sure.
So you wrote Genesis a note, right?
Yes.
You'd recognize that note if I were to show it to you?
Yes.
Your Honor, can we screen share Exhibit 24?
Yes.
One moment, I think it's taking a second. One moment, Your Honor, I think it's taking a second.
If it helps, I have it on my screen as well.
I think we can have it up, but that might be necessary in a second. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Now you recognize this note, right?
Yes,
You wrote it to Genesis.
I did, correct.
It's a fair and accurate copy.
Seems to be.
Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Is this Exhibit 24 the same Exhibit 24 that was that same exhibit that was received earlier today?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, then it is already in evidence and you may use it.
Yes, Your Honor. And now you wrote this note to Genesis before the wedding, right?
Yes.
You told her that you would give her $300,000 to stop the wedding.
It was somewhat of a last-ditch effort, but yes. And Genesis actually took that money, but didn't leave Casey.
Well, you said that if she didn't stop the wedding, you would take her out of the picture.
I was talking about maybe causing a scene at the wedding and stopping the wedding myself if she didn't do it. But yes, I said that.
Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I'm just asking about what this letter said. This letter says you'll take her out of the picture.
That's what it says. I was going to stop the wedding myself.
Well, you said you'll take her out of the picture the hard way if she didn't stop that wedding.
By stopping the wedding myself, yes.
You told her she had until June 7th.
The day before the wedding, yes.
Told her to choose wisely.
Yes, that's exactly what the note says.
Now, June 7th, that was the day of the rehearsal dinner, right? And we can on-screen share this. Thank you.
Yes, it was.
I want to talk about that dinner. Now, that was the day of the rehearsal dinner between Genesis and Casey, right?
Yes.
And at around 2:30 that next morning, you got a phone call, right?
Yes, one of my employees was very panicked because something was going on at the winery.
Right, you thought it could have been Genesis.
I thought it could have been Genesis or somebody else from the wedding party, yeah.
So you didn't go to the hospital, right?
No, I wanted to make sure that everything at the winery was okay. It's the property that I own, so I wanted to make sure there wasn't anything bad going on there first.
Ma'am, you didn't just go to the winery, you went straight to Genesis's room, right?
Genesis had ended up in the hospital before, so it was my first thought. I wanted to see if Genesis was the one in the hospital.
Ma'am, that's a yes to my question. You went right to Genesis's room.
Yes, I did.
You went there alone.
Yeah, it was 2:30 in the morning.
You saw that empty bottle of Cara wine that you bottled earlier.
Not earlier in the day. I bottled it a couple months before, but yeah, I had bottled it and it was on the floor.
You ripped off the label.
Yes, I was angry.
And at 2:30 in the morning, alone in that room, you threw it in the trash.
Yes, there was no reason to keep an empty bottle of wine on the floor.
Now, ma'am, you are relieved that Genesis is no longer in your life.
I'm relieved that she's no longer in Casey's life because she was a bad influence.
You are happy she's no longer in your lives.
I wouldn't say happy. I'm devastated because it made Casey so sad, but I'm relieved that Genesis is no longer in our lives.
Ma'am, is it your testimony today you weren't happy that Genesis was no longer in your life?
I was relieved.
You weren't happy?
No, I was just relieved. I was sad because Casey was sad.
Your Honor, may we screen share a copy of this witness's statement?
Yeah, is this a prior sworn statement?
Yes, Your Honor, it's her prior sworn statement.
Yes.
One moment. Thank you. Now, you recognize this document.
Yeah.
This is your sworn statement.
I think it was an interrogation or a questioning I was given.
It's a statement. You made statements and they're sworn.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'm just confused about what statement meant.
Now, I want to direct your attention to line 364. It's highlighted here. Can you read silently as I read aloud? I won't
Yes.
be, I won't lie. Part of me is relieved, even happy, that Genesis is no longer in our lives. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Ms. Milko. Mr. York, do you have any redirect?
No, Your Honor. At this time, I ask that the witness be allowed to step down from the stand.
All right, Ms. Martini, thank you for your testimony. You may take a seat. I'm aware of the time. Well, first, do we have any further witnesses from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense closes their case in chief.
Okay, and are we going to entertain any motions today?
No motions from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Okay, and are we ready to proceed to closing statements?
Yes, Your
Yes,
Honor.
Your Honor, I am. Just one moment to change the name.
I'm cognizant of the time.
Your Honor, defense would ask that we could maybe knock 2 minutes off of each side's statements for the sake of time.
Your Honor, I don't think that'll be necessary because we do have enough time to give both closings, and we can ask Tab for an extra minute or two.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary to knock 2 off of both.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I won't interrupt. I see there's a dispute about whether or not we have the time. I know we've had some technical issues, so I think they'll give us some grace there.
We have had technical issues, Your Honor.
So a couple minutes should be fine by me. If it's 10 minutes, of course, that's a different ballgame. So with that, is the plaintiff ready to close?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Melcook, the jury is with you.
On May 12th, 2019, Harper Martini's world came crashing down. You see, on that day, she received a voicemail from her future daughter-in-law, Genesis Petrillo. In that voicemail, Genesis Petrillo said, "I'm taking your son away. We're moving to France. You'll never see him again." And ladies and gentlemen, Harper was scared. Scared she'd lose her only son to a woman she hated. Now, members of the jury, I'm sure, like a lot of parents, Harper Martini wanted the best for her son. But she didn't just want the best for her son, members of the jury, she wanted control. She wanted control of her son, Casey Soto's future. And today you've seen that she would do anything to get it. That's why we've charged the defendant, Harper Martini, with battery. And I want to talk about the law a little bit because I think we had some confusion earlier. Now, in the defense's opening statement, they asked, why aren't they bringing a case in criminal court? Your Honor, this is a civil trial. The estate of Genesis Petrillo is suing Harper Martini. Whether or not there's another case in criminal trial is for another court at another time in another jurisdiction. But I want to be clear, members of the jury, we do not represent the state, and our burden of proof is to prove that it is more likely than not that Harper Martini intentionally intended to cause harm to the plaintiff and did so. We've met that burden. We've shown that Harper Martini caused the death of Genesis Petrillo and intended to do so by poisoning a bottle of wine. And now, when I talk about exactly why that's the case, I want you to remember 3 points: the pain, the plan, and the poison. 3 ways she sought to regain control. We might ask, members of the jury, why? Why would Harper Martini want to kill her future daughter-in-law? Well, members of the jury, I'm not going to mince words here. You learned today that Harper Martini hated Genesis Petrillo from the moment they met. And you heard that on May 12th, 2019, Genesis said something that changed the stakes. She said, "I'm taking your son away. You'll never see him again." And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Genesis knew she had to do something. She knew Genesis was the biggest mistake in her son's life, and she needed nothing more than to stop the wedding. So she writes a note and she makes a plan. And folks, she's not very secretive about that plan. She wrote a note to Genesis telling her exactly what would happen if she didn't call up the wedding. She wrote a note to Genesis saying, if you don't call off the wedding, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. You have until June 7th, the night of the rehearsal dinner. The night Genesis was poisoned. Genesis didn't call off the wedding. Let's talk about what happened there. Because you learned that Angel Rodriguez told you she saw Harper Martini holding a bottle of pesticides. And when asked what it was for, she said, it's for Genesis. And you also heard from Lonnie Paris that he went and investigated Peony Estates, and he saw in the bottling area an empty canister of pesticides right next to a bottle of Cara wine. And members of the jury, you heard that was the same bottle that Harper gave Genesis. And you heard that that same bottle, later tested positive for pesticides. And you heard how Genesis went to the hospital and Harper Martini got rid of the evidence. At 2:30 in the morning, she got a call saying she thought Genesis was going to the hospital. And what did she do? She didn't go visit Genesis. She didn't call anyone. She didn't even call Casey. No, she went right to Genesis' room, and only Genesis' room, by herself. Ripped off the label of the wine bottle and destroyed the evidence by throwing it away. Members of the jury, she didn't think she'd get caught. She didn't think they'd find that bottle and find that it tested positive for pesticides. And we know it was that caused her death. Now, we've heard a lot about alcohol poisoning, folks, today. They brought an expert before you, Dr. Cannon, who told you that her blood alcohol content could have been higher than 0.16. But members of the jury, you heard no evidence that it could be even close to high enough to cause death by alcohol poisoning. We brought forward an expert, Dr. Kwong, who told you that 0.16 is nowhere near the threshold to cause an alcohol poisoning death. Dr. Kwon also told you that all of her symptoms matched pesticide poisoning, and she had several that were critically different than alcohol poisoning. And more so, members of the jury, Dr. Kwon ran tests. He didn't just look at the symptoms, she ran tests to confirm that she had pesticides in her system mixed with the wine that she drank. Members of the jury, it was clear. She died because of the pesticides in her system. Now, members of the jury, I've talked a lot about today, about Casey Soto and his mother. I want to take a second to think about Genesis Petrillo and her mother. Her mother will never see her daughter walk down the aisle. Her mother will never see her get her first promotion. Will never see her buy a house, start a family. Because of what Harper Martini did, the lives of everyone Genesis knew is forever changed. And members of the jury, we can't work miracles. But what we can do is bring justice. Find Harper Martini liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belcote. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is the plaintiff permitted a rebuttal closing?
Yes, Your Honor, we are, and we don't have to reserve time for that.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure. Ms. Peterson, the jury's with you.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury. May it please the court. Not enough facts to prove the act. Throughout today's trial, we have been asking you to take a second look at the plaintiff's case. They presented you with a story about how Harper Martini is an overbearing mother who hated her child's partner so much that she gifted them a poison bottle of wine the night before their wedding. Wine that could have easily been shared with those seated near Petrillo, like Casey Soto, Harper's own child. And the plaintiff believes that this convenient story is enough. Instead of presenting you with facts, they've relied on testimony from biased witnesses. Members of the jury, you're not here today to consider biased opinions. You're here to determine whether the facts prove that the law was or was not broken. So let's talk about those facts. On June 7th, 2019, a rehearsal dinner was held for the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo. At that dinner, Harper Martini gifted Petrillo a bottle of wine. Later that night, Petrillo was taken to the hospital, and the following morning, she slipped into a coma and passed away. The plaintiff is accusing Harper Martini of battery. And battery is consisted of three necessary elements. There was an act by the defendant, there was intent by the defendant to cause harmful contact, and there was harmful contact to the plaintiff. Now, our justice system does not require Harper Martini to prove anything. The defense bears no burden. This burden rests entirely with the plaintiff. They must prove each element of battery by a preponderance of the evidence, which means something is more likely than not. But the plaintiff has failed to reach this burden today. And by not reaching their burden, they have laid out the conclusion for you, that Harper Martini is not liable for battery. This is the only conclusion that justice allows. Now, they failed to provide a witness who actually saw Miss Martini poison the wine because it did not happen. There are not enough facts to prove the act because there was no act. Now, Petrillo died a tragic death, but there are still questions about her cause of death. The plaintiff called Dr. Kwan, who was supposed to give an objective scientific opinion, but Dr. Kwan already had a strongly established bias against anyone who uses chemical pesticides before they became involved with the case. But you heard from Dr. Cannon, an expert in toxicology, who told you that she would not have been as quick to rule out other possible causes of death. She talked about how BAC changes over time and how because of this, Petrillo's true peak BAC that night will never be known. Now, to try and establish intent, the plaintiff called Angel Rodriguez to discuss the relationship between Harper and Petrillo. But members of the jury, through Ms. Rodriguez's testimony, all we learned is that she is far too close to this case to be able to give an unbiased account of the events leading up to Petrillo's death. Now, I don't know about you, but my parents sure don't always like my romantic choices. Parents want what is best for their child, and Harper was no different. She had doubts about whether Petrillo was right for Casey, but when she knew for sure that this is what Casey wanted, she put her concerns aside and she went to work to ensure that the wedding would be a success. The plaintiff has made a jump in logic, assuming that a difficult relationship between a future mother-in-law and daughter-in-law could somehow be taken to a harmful extreme, and they have failed to fill in this gap of logic. Now, the plaintiff also brought you Lonnie Paris to try and corroborate this characterization of Harper Martini as a bad person. But Mr. Paris showed that he is not a credible witness, considering his testimony relies entirely on experiences he had while trespassing on private property. Not enough facts, and so their burden has not been met. But from defense, you heard witnesses who speak to the facts. You heard testimony from Blair Osborne, who was hired by Harper to plan the wedding. Harper wanted Miss Osborne to go above and beyond for her child. And Miss Osborne also testified to Harper Martini's professionalism as a business owner. Peony Estates, apart from Casey, was Harper Martini's greatest accomplishment. And Casey's wedding was supposed to be a culmination of all of the things that Harper loved the most: her child and her business. Why would she threaten her relationship with either of those? But you got to hear from Harper herself. She talked honestly about her struggles with Petrillo. Their relationship was far from ideal, but it was also far from unusual for a relationship between a future mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. They tried to talk things out on multiple occasions, and Harper offered up her winery as the venue for the wedding. Even the night before the wedding, she extended an olive branch to Petrillo to symbolize that she was welcome to the family and that they could put their own difficulties aside for Casey's sake. Now, members of the jury, you have heard and you have seen the evidence, and we have shown you that not a single person saw Harper Martini poison that wine. There was no act, and there was no intent. The plaintiff has failed to show how this relationship between Harper and Petrillo could have somehow been taken to a harmful extreme. On a second look at today's case, it is clear that Ms. Martini's motives have been grossly misconstrued by the plaintiff. There was no act. There was only a mother selflessly working to ensure her child's happiness. Now, the plaintiff has not reached their burden. And so you must find Harper Martini not liable for battery. What happened to Genesis Petrillo was a tragedy, but Harper Martini is not at fault. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Ms. Melko?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe I have about 20 seconds left.
All right, well, take it.
It's fine. Thank you. Members of the jury, they just got up here and told you that we don't have intent because they thought Angel Rodriguez was biased. Don't take her words for it, members of the jury. Take the defendant's, the words she wrote to Genesis. I will take you out of the picture. You have until June 7th, the day Genesis died. She needed control. Find her liable.
All right, thank you all. Very, very well done. We will I'm not a scoring judge, so maybe I can give a little bit of feedback here. While Megan and our other scoring judge, I believe Maria, continue to finish their tabs. Would that be okay or enjoyed or?
I think we have to wait till the ballots are submitted to give comments, but I actually just submitted mine. So
cool.
As soon as Megan's done, then we can.
Yeah. Give me like 2 seconds to submit this and then we can start.
Okay.
And then Megan, do you want to text them or I can text them, let them know we're done?
All right. I'm done. So I can text Elliot real quick.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So I'll just introduce myself really quickly and go through a few comments, then I'll turn it over. Does that work?
Works for me.
Okay, great. So my name's, thank you all, well done. My name is Zachary Harris. I am an attorney here in Winston-Salem, which is cool to say. I just graduated from Wake Forest Law last year. And so it's cool to be like, I'm an attorney. I practice complex litigation, primarily plaintiff side, malpractice and injury. So I was on Wake's trial teams. Me and Megan were teammates. I really enjoyed this trial, and I'll go through comments really quickly. Maybe I'm not allowed to ask this, but it gets to a point. Ms. Melko, are you the Wake Forest team?
I'm not.
Okay, so this will get to my point. Your mannerisms and the way you argued remind me precisely of one of my teammates who now coaches the undergrad Wake Forest team, Danny Kunkel. She's a great advocate. I like her a lot. But the fact that you guys, it was a Danny closing. It was like listening to her, which on one hand is great because she's a great advocate. On the other hand, this goes to everyone. It shows that we have characters that we go into when we do arguments. We have lawyer character. And to me, that's less effective than being able to be purely yourself. And maybe that is, I don't know you, but I'm using it as a broader point, which is, from my view, the best advocates are the ones who get up before the jury and are themselves and are personal, and aren't trying to fit into their idea of what an advocate should be. Here you are advocating, you're an advocate. So whatever you are is what an advocate should be. And that's not, and she's just an example. Hope I haven't offended. Another broad question that I'll ask is, think for a moment about, is there anything that you said in your closing arguments, or that was used in your closing arguments, that was used today that wasn't used when you practiced? My point there is, being able to listen during the trial and identify when a witness gives you a golden nugget when they say something that they shouldn't have. You know, Martini says that she meant that she was going to stop the wedding herself. Man, well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she sure stopped it, didn't she? I mean, being able to pull what is said in trial is super effective. I'll give a few narrow thoughts and then I'll stop speaking. Good job remembering what my instructions or rulings were. You know, whether that's, hey, didn't we exclude that person? Or, you know, remembering that I said during someone's questioning, hey, don't ask for permission to show demonstratives, just do it. Remembering that stuff shows that you're with it. The expert witnesses preference here, give me a clear opinion at the top, right? At the top of your examination. Dr. Cannon, what are you going to talk to us about? Well, it's my opinion that X, and then spend the rest of the time building it. Even when I talk to expert witnesses in prep, first thing I want to know is, Doc, do you support our case or not? Like, tell me, what do you think happened? And then go through why you think it happened. But give me the framework to understand why you're telling me what you're about to tell me. I have a lot more thoughts I could go through, but I don't think I will because the next round is at 2 and I want to make sure that Megan and Maria have to have time to share. So well done. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I guess I can give some quick comments. My name's Maria Hooker. I am currently a second-year medical student. I did mock trial in undergrad at Miami, actually. I'm Danny's age, so I did mock trial with Danny Kunkel for 3 years. So I agree that the closing was very Danny-esque. Yeah, so I did mock trial at Miami, and I was on the national championship team in 2018. That is when I started medical school because I'm the only person who ever did mock trial who doesn't want to be a lawyer, but that's okay. I want to be a pediatrician. So a few quick comments. I think you guys are great for like being so early in the season. I said this yesterday to the teams that I judged. You guys know what's going to be objectionable. Like, you know what evidence is going to be a problem. You know what exhibits are going to be a problem. So if you're bringing that forward, you need to have 3 reasons and 3 exceptions ready to go. Because if the first one doesn't work, then you got to move to the second one and move to the third one. And then you need to have a contingency plan if it doesn't get in at all. Because I think this applies to both witnesses and attorneys. The witness has to be prepared to change their testimony completely if something doesn't come in. And I saw some of you guys doing that really well today and some of you struggling with it. So just know what in your testimony or in your direct or cross is possibly not going to get in. Have 3 different rules prepared. And if those don't work, be able to handle it then. Another small thing, this is just like a personal pet peeve. 401 and 403. So if you say something is like, oh, it's more prejudicial or substantially more prejudicial than probative, you're agreeing that it's relevant because it's in that rule. It's like, oh, it's relevant, but it's substantially more prejudicial than probative. So you can't say 401 and 403 at the same time. You can be like, oh, well, it's irrelevant and it's substantially more prejudicial than probative. So you got to exclude it under both rules. You got to like pick one. So I'll usually go, when I did it at Miami, I would go with relevance first. And if that didn't work, I'd be like, well, if you believe it's relevant, then it is substantially more prejudicial than probative. That's just like a small thing, but I thought you guys were great. If you have any questions, concerns, I put a lot of comments under the form that we could fill out, and they're very detailed. But if you want to ask any questions or whatever, I'm going to put my email in here. Or if you want to go to medical school and want to talk about that, we can chat about that. But yeah, you guys are great.
Thank you.
Next. All right, cool. Hello, everyone. First of all, congratulations on making it through round 3. And if this is your first tournament of the semester or the year, congratulations, you're almost done. One more round to go. My name is Megan. I'm a 3L here at Wake Law. I'm the captain of the AHA trial team here. I formerly competed with Zach. He was my captain last year. I did mock trial in undergrad for about 3 years, then came here and did trial team. So I just have a few general comments. I also filled out the feedback form, comments form. I tried to be as specific as possible. I'm not a very fast typer, unfortunately, so it's not super detailed. So I will also put my email in the chat if you have any questions about things I've written, want to talk, want to know my individual comments for you. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'll try my best. Just some general comments. And this kind of goes to what Zach was saying about sometimes it's better to be genuine versus like a persona. You guys had tended to use a lot of formal language, even when you were talking in directs to non-expert witnesses. You were saying things like attributed and characterized to, someone who's not an expert. Make it more conversational, make it, and it's also something to be said during pretrial of, it's very formal to say, good morning, Your Honor, good evening, Your Honor. Sometimes it goes a long way to just be like, good morning, Your Honor. Can we introduce ourselves quickly before we begin? To just be, natural and light with it, because that's how you would be in real court. You wouldn't be super, super formal, especially not if you were in like district court. Something on cross-examinations. A lot of y'all, every single question had like a qualifier at the end. So you would say, you went to the store, right or correct, or didn't you? And you'd have at the end of every single question you asked. Try to cut that out. Try to just use your tone to do that, to make it a yes or no question. And then you can save those bits at the end for when you have to clarify or when you have like a really strong point. It's way more effective to use those if you haven't been using them the entire time. Also, if you tend to use the same one over and over and over again, like mine is correct, that's the one I always go to, it tends to sound really repetitive and like a tick. So try to cut those out. Also, we tend to say at an undergrad mock trial, you say something like, please try to answer my questions with only a yes or no, or please answer the question, or something like that. A witness is not required to answer yes or no. You have to force them to do it. And personally, as someone who played a witness, like whenever I heard that question, I was always like, oh, that means I'm not going to answer your question. Whatever you're about to ask yes or no, that means you're about to ask something that you want to know yes or like really want to know yes or no answer to. So use your questions and use your clarifying questions to control the witness instead. Also, don't warn the witness where you're going. Don't warn them that this is your last question or anything like that, because then they know that this is your last question. Of course, I'm going to fight on it. So just get to it, ask them the question. This is just like a personal thing. It's something that I was told very early on in my mock trial career, and I like it, so I try to pass it on. We've always been taught in openings and closings to say, you will hear or you heard. Try to say we will hear, we heard. It's something that, especially if you are in a jury trial, it sort of puts yourself in the same boat as a jury. And it goes a long way to saying like, I'm also in this courtroom. We're going to hear this today. It kind of, it endears you to them, because like when you do get into real life and you're doing jury trials, you want to make the jury like you and you want to be likable. And that's something that can go a long way. The last thing I just want to talk quickly about is Zoom trials. They're weird. We're all still figuring them out. I'm at the law school level and we're still figuring out, we're like with you guys on that. We're trying to figure out how to do a Zoom trial.
Same in practice. I mean, all the time
Yeah.
It's CLE, here's how we do it, here's how we do it.
Right. We're all like, so at this point, like, I don't think anyone can definitively say how to do it right. I can just tell you what's wrong at this point. And we're learning that as we do it. So no stress. I'm not taking out points for like anything that's a Zoom related thing. Just some notes. So going forward, you can have these notes in mind and work on fixing this. If you're going to stand, be conscious of your Zoom angles. There's something I've been told in when you're in a real courtroom, which is that if you're tall like I am, don't stand close to the jury, especially if you're in heels, because you tend to loom over them and it tends to make people uncomfortable. You stand a little bit backwards if you're taller like I am. Same thing with a Zoom angle. If your thing is like this and I'm standing and I'm looming like this, it gives the same impression. So if you're going to stand for statements, try and work out your Zoom angles ahead of time so that you can maybe put some books or something underneath your laptop so you're more at eye level when you're doing it. Another thing is address some stuff in pretrial in terms of Zoom. Something along the lines of something we're doing when we are competing right now, when we're talking about exhibits, we ask in pretrial, Your Honor, would you like us to assume that all exhibits and demos have been shared outside the presence of the jury and that they won't see them until we publish them? Just to kind of keep that. It's hard because we don't have a jury, it's all constructive, but just trying to, get that out of the way in pretrial. But good job, guys. You guys dealt with the technical difficulties well, for that we had them and everything. And technical difficulties are going to happen in Zoom. They're going to happen. I have not done a single practice trial where we have not had a technical issue yet. And I've not judged around in this tournament where there was not a technical issue of some type. So when it happens, stay calm, take a deep breath, and just keep going and figure it out, work it out, and keep going. That's all I got.
Thank you all. If no one else has any questions, we can wrap it up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go, guys.
Thank you.